Our next speaker is Vagisha Sharma from the McCoss Lab at the UW. She's going to talk about Panorama publishing supplementary targeted proteomics data processed with Skyline.
So I've been told I should try to eat the mic. Okay, hope everybody can hear me. See, I got to remember that few researcher questions survive contact with data. So anyway, I thought this was a longish title for a short talk, but then I noticed that there are even longer titles, talk titles in this session, so I guess I'll just start talking about Panorama. Panorama Public is a repository for targeted proteomics data processed with Skyline. And before I get into how Panorama Public was enabled by LabKey server, I want to talk a little bit about Skyline, which is a freely available open source Windows client application that helps users design targeted proteomics methods and analyze the resulting data. It was developed by Brendan McLean at the McCoss Lab. Brendan was one of the founding partners of LabKey software, and in 2008, he joined the McCoss Lab and created Skyline. And today, I think it is probably the most commonly used tool in this field. We have over 6,000 registered users, and I think it would be fair to say that Skyline has played a big role in the growth and popularity of targeted proteomics in recent years. So as Skyline usage shot up, we realized very quickly that we needed a way to organize and manage all the Skyline documents that were being generated in various labs, including our own. And since LabKey server already had great proteomics capabilities, we decided to extend that to add support for targeted proteomics data contained in Skyline documents. And that is how Panorama came about. It has been implemented as a module in LabKey server for storing, sharing, analyzing, and reusing targeted methods created and refined with Skyline. Our initial goals were to let our users organize and reuse targeted assays that were generated with Skyline. We wanted them to be able to share their data with the collaborators. We wanted to provide a web browser interface for people to be able to view the Skyline results within a web browser. We also wanted them to be able to do things like run R scripts to analyze their data on LabKey server. So this was all possible by things that already existed in LabKey server. And Panorama has actually grown quite a bit in its capabilities since these initial goals were set, and it's being jointly developed by the McCoss Lab and LabKey software. So once we had a working module, we deployed LabKey server and the Panorama module on one of the servers at the Department of Genome Sciences. And we allowed users to request free projects on this server where they could store their documents and use the full Panorama capabilities. And currently, this server hosts projects for over 100 labs all over the world. We gave project owners full control over their projects. So amongst other things, they could do things like decide who gets to view their data. And what we started seeing was that several researchers would put their Skyline documents associated with manuscripts up on their projects on Panorama. And they would put a link to the folder that contained that data in their manuscript. And then initially, they would give access to reviewers to look at that data. And when the paper was accepted, they would make the folder public. So anybody reading their paper could click on the link and view the data on Panorama Web. So this was a great way of making data public to fulfill journal submission requirements. However, the data remained under the control of the original author, so it might accidentally get deleted or altered after the paper had been published. So we decided to provide a mechanism to make a read-only copy of that data on a separate location on Panorama Web, and authors would provide a link to this read-only copy in their manuscripts. And this location on Panorama Web, where we copy published data, is called Panorama Public. Too many P's, as somebody told me one time. And this is basically just a project on Panorama Web that's administered by the site admins. And having all this data in a single location is great because it lets us create a searchable catalog of all this data in one place. So if your data is already on Panorama Web in a project, it can very easily be published to Panorama Public, and this sort of becomes a permanent resting place for the data where it continues to remain available in the original form as it was intended for publication. So this is what the workflow looks like for anybody wanting to put their Skyline documents on Panorama Public. So the first step is, of course, to upload the documents to a project. And this is done easily by clicking a button directly from Skyline. The next step is to provide some description about the experiment, so things like an abstract, the instrument on which the data was acquired, the sample information, things like that. And once users have done that, then they can click on this publish button, and this brings up a form where they can create a URL that they want to use to link to their data. And this uses the short URL capability in Panorama Server, which sort of like tiny URL. It lets you create short, easy to remember links. And this is relative to the server on which this link is created. So for us on Panorama Web, the initial part stays the same, and then the user gets to decide what appears after the context path. So in this case, they've chosen CP Tag Study 9. Once that form is submitted, it triggers an email to the administrators, and then we initiate the copy process. And the link that the user had created in the previous step, initially it links to the researcher's project on Panorama Web, but after the copy has been completed, the target is changed to this new read-only copy on Panorama Public. So the way we implemented this was by combining some existing functionality in LabKey server and things that were implemented for the Panorama project. The first one of these was the ability to export and import folders. So you can export a folder, including all the folder settings, the queries, reports, views, pretty much everything can be exported as an archive, which can then be imported in a new location or a new folder on either on the same server or even on a different LabKey server. But this folder export import did not have the option to include experiments and runs in the exported archive. And we needed that to be able to include our Skyline documents in the exported folder. However, there existed a mechanism by which experiments and runs could be exported as these experimental archives or ZAR files. So there was a ZAR exporter that did the exporting and a ZAR reader that imported the runs back from a ZAR archive. So we adapted these to work with the folder import-export functionality. And then finally, I already talked about short URLs, and this was something that was implemented by Josh Eccles at LabKey for the Panorama project. So to add support for including experiments and runs in the folder archive, we added a folder writer, folder importer pair. The folder writer makes use of ZAR exporter to write the runs to the exported folder, and the folder ZAR importer uses the ZAR reader. And we registered these with the folder serialization registry to make this option to export experiments and runs be available when a folder is exported or imported. And finally, with all of that in place, we created a new pipeline job in the Panorama module that exports the folder, including the runs, experiments, basically everything about the folder, and then we import it to the destination folder on Panorama Public. And then finally, we update the target of the researcher-created URL to point to this new location on Panorama Public. And that's how things work. I'd like to thank Brendan McLean, who pretty much is the driving force behind both Panorama and Skyline. Want to thank everybody at LabKey who helped me with the initial development of the module and continue to help me, especially Josh Eccles, who's very, very helpful and incredibly patient, I must say. And really, thanks to everyone at LabKey for keeping the software open source and providing these great APIs. I can't tell you how many of our collaborators have been using these APIs to build their own external tools and websites around data in Panorama Web, and just makes my job so much easier working with them because of these great APIs. And yeah, anytime I think of something that I need to do with LabKey server, usually it's already there or it can be added with a little bit of work. So I've had great fun working with the LabKey software. Thank you all.